In honor of Halloween, I wanted to do something different today and talk about a game that I've been wanting to play for a while now. Bioshock was released in 2007 and follows Jack, a lone survivor of a plane crash who stumbles upon Rapture, which is this abandoned underwater utopia that he has to figure out how to navigate to escape. Now, this is a game that I've wanted to play for years now. In fact, I've wanted to play the Bioshock trilogy since I saw the first couple trailers for Bioshock Infinite back all the way in 2013. I was always fascinated by those trailers and fascinated by this IP, and have not really gotten a solid opportunity to actually play any of the games all the way through. And because the game is regarded as one of the better horror games ever made, I wanted to talk about it for Halloween, and I am glad that I finally got to play it, because it is definitely worth talking about. Now, like I said, the game takes place in Rapture. Rapture was founded by Andrew Ryan, an idealistic leader who created the city with the promise of no government interference and everybody is entitled to the sweat of their brow. The game takes place in 1960, several years after Rapture has been abandoned by the majority of the population due to rampant anarchy and a civil war, leaving only a handful of people in power and hundreds of splicers, who are people corrupted by Adam, a substance that can make a person more powerful at the expense of their sanity. You are also guided throughout the game by Atlas, a citizen of Rapture trying to save his family. And to put it simply, I loved this game. I think it's one of the most atmospheric games I've ever played, and I think that's because its setting and structure was right down my alley. I like horror games because I feel like they are a little bit more immersive than other games can be. It feels like it puts you right into the game and the situation. And I also like narrative-driven games. This game is structured as a linear first-person shooter, so you do go out throughout the game in a linear fashion for the story, but it also gives you the chance to explore the area, which is the type of game I really like. That's why I love like the Uncharted franchise, The Last of Us, games like that. I love those narrative-driven stories that give you a little bit of room to breathe to actually explore what's going on around them. And while it by no means is an actual open world, it does have enough going on in the different sections of the game where you can find stuff that you wouldn't find if you didn't go looking for it. So when you explore those areas, you do find actual items and power-ups throughout the game. And I personally am not always a huge fan of first-person shooters, but I think that in the context of this game, it worked really well. Like I said before, with it being more of an eerie, horror-ish game, it does immerse you more into that setting. I think the story itself is engrossing. As Jack, you try to help Atlas in return for a way out of Rapture. As you go along, you run into several different characters and enemies. One of the most important aspects of the game is the Little Sisters, which are young girls who harvest Adam and are hunted by splicers, while also being protected by Big Daddies, these incredibly powerful bouncers who are emotionally bonded to the Little Sisters and protect them. You will run into several of these characters throughout the game and have the options to not engage them at all, or kill the Big Daddy, then choose whether to harvest or rescue the Little Sister. If you harvest them, you absorb all of their Adam, killing them in the process, and if you rescue them, you absorb some of their Adam while curing them of their corruption. And this does actually help drive the story, which is something I really liked about this game too, because there's so much detail put into the environment of this game. So when you do go explore, when you do fight the Big Daddies and everything, you can also find these other items, like these recordings from different characters that gives context to what Rapture is and what happened to make it get to the state it's in. And it gives backstory, it helps develop the characters. I think that part is really, really well done. And it's also structured in a certain way where you do feel like you are discovering this information. It's never just laid out right in front of you. you feel like you've kind of stumbled upon it, which I think is a really, really good level in game design. And it helps you kind of uncover this mystery of Rapture. Now, Bioshock, of course, is famous for its twist. Luckily, I never really knew the context of the twist. I knew kind of the scene in which it happens, but I didn't really know what was going on. So the twist in this game was still fresh for me, and I think that the story itself is really solid and entertaining all the way through. You never feel like the story really lags at any point throughout the game. And you can especially just see the amount of effort that was put into telling the story, which I really appreciate. As far as the technical aspect of the gameplay is a lot of fun. For combat, you have the choice between physical weapons and powers that can be discovered as you progress. There's a good balance in the gameplay where you have to figure out what type of weapon or power is the most effective against certain enemies. There's also a solid variety of enemies, which helps keep the game from getting redundant. And most of the time you feel like you are in legitimate danger in these unexpected confrontations. And hands down, my favorite part of this game is the setting. I've talked about it a little bit so far, but the game feels eerie and it feels sinister throughout because Rapture is abandoned and it's dangerous. All of the areas have the Art Deco design of the 1930s, giving it a weird tongue-in-cheek quirkiness. You'll have famous songs from the 20s and 30s playing throughout the different areas, which adds to the tone of the game. I love the design of the game and levels throughout, like I said before. That specifically will probably be the reason I want to come back to play it. It actually reminded me a lot of Batman Arkham Asylum, which I know was released after Bioshock and everything, so maybe it took inspiration from it, but is a game that I played back in 2009 and has remained to be one of my favorite video games of all time. The writing and acting is also really good. Armin Shimmerman's performance as Andrew Ryan is a standout. He is one of the more interesting video game villains I've seen. The creators did take a lot of inspiration for him in Rapture from the writings of Ayn Rand, which makes sense because of the name that Andrew Ryan has and his libertarian ideologies and philosophies. My only big criticism of the game is that the gameplay does feel kind of unbalanced towards the end of it. If you do take the time to explore the areas and get all of the power-ups you can throughout the game, you get to the point where you're basically unkillable, which is satisfying in the fact that you have built up your character and everything and taken the time to find all these power-ups. But it does kind of take away from the weight of the story by the end of the game, because there's one sequence where you have to help escort a character and you don't feel like you're ever in danger in that sequence. And then the final boss battle of the game I thought was really underwhelming, because out of all the weapons and powers you have, really if you just use one weapon, you can kill the final boss without even using all the ammo from it, which was disappointing. I was hoping for something a lot more difficult because so much of the rest of the games felt so well balanced, because you never felt like you were safe. You felt like you could be killed if you go into a confrontation with just a couple enemies and it goes sideways, or if you run into a big daddy and are not prepared to fight him. I do also think the story ends super quickly, which is kind of unsatisfying because I feel like you've spent so much time building up to the climax of the story that the kind of immediate and really quick resolution doesn't really feel like it wraps up the way that you would want it to, just in my opinion. However, I do still think that this is a really well written story for a video game especially. I really enjoyed this game, and while I wouldn't myself necessarily classify it as a horror game, I do think that it uses a lot of horror elements to enhance the gameplay, and that worked really well. And it definitely has a very creepy atmosphere and setting, and I think that that was the best part of the game. And while I might be nearly 15 years late to playing this game, I definitely think it is one that is worth going back to, especially if you haven't played it before. So I'm going to be rating Bioshock a 9.5 out of 10. Now, what did you guys think of Bioshock? What's your favorite game from the trilogy? Let me know, and I'll be back with another video.